This is going to be an enriching set of conversations now. We're beginning our conference on the circular economy. We spoke earlier, for those of you who joined us for the energy discussions, about proactivism, about a different approach to activism that is positive and solution-oriented, that is not all about demonizing an enemy, but is also about allying and finding important allies. We began in the luncheon to have a conversation with KoAnn and with Robert. KoAnn from Sustainable Brands and Robert from Amazon, and I will ask them to join me up here on the stage to continue that conversation. Now, come on up. And then when we finish that conversation, we're going to expand the group. Robert will bid his adieus, and then we're going to have a conversation about the power of retailers and the retail sector in driving positive change. That will be our lesson in really a different approach to activism, old style activism, responding to an industrial economy, a linear industrial economy that operated with command and control as a primary means of power, really adopted command and control as the counter to industrial power 50 years ago when we had the first Earth Day, 55 years ago now, I guess. Yeah, 55 years ago, the first Earth Day, as an adversarial battle between good and bad, dark and light. And that battle sells. It sold some solutions in the early years. We got some good environmental laws from that perceived battle between good and evil. But after about 10 years or so, we stopped winning and we started just gridlocking. And not much of anything for the past 40 years has managed to be passed through that methodology of just demonizing the opposition. In fact, we've had a thriving industry that has been built around demonizing the opposition. And it's not just the combatants that are engaged in that business model, it's the political and business and media industry that really, unbeknownst to themselves, a few people maybe intended this, but most people have just grown up with it, where political and media players make money by perpetuating these battles between the left and the right, between corporations and activist groups. And we get nothing done. Because when you divide the people in half, you get nothing done. The status quo kind of slips on through. So what we have celebrated here at EarthX is bringing folks together. Feedback and adaptation means positive recognition of brands for the changes that they're making so that they can continue to make those changes. And KoAnn, as I indicated earlier, has been a leader in this arena for decades, recognizing the power of brands, and it's how she grew Sustainable Brands to be the preeminent brand for sustainable brand leaders. And Robert with Amazon, the largest retailer on the planet, you maybe haven't even heard of Amazon, I'm sure most of you haven't, but it's quietly behind the scenes the largest retailer and the largest retail force on the planet. And we are more than glad that they are on the right side, and we are more than glad to be able to recognize people like Robert who are leading the charge from inside, not an easy task. So I'll hand it to you, KoAnn and Robert.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
How many of you were at lunch? Okay, glad to hear that. So we don't need to repeat any of the spiel from lunch, and we're going to move on from there just to have a good conversation with Robert around what's underneath the recognition you're getting right now. You all heard that Robert is behind. He's the Vice President of Environmental Management Worldwide, Environmental Operations Worldwide, and is responsible for all things environmental impact around the world, which is a big deal. I'm going to start by asking you, who the stakeholders are of your work, and how is Amazon evaluating the business value proposition of the work that you do?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the recognition again. I mentioned it on the main stage, just completely humbled by it, and just absolutely blown away. So fantastic. Love the other 10 companies and all 10 of them. So thank you for that. Yeah, there's a lot of stakeholders, and I think we share a lot of them in common, but it starts really with our customers. And one of our, we have 16 leadership principles at Amazon, and we're really serious about them. That's part of our culture. And it starts with one of them, which is, I don't want to say which one is the most important, but customer obsession is one of them. And our customers work backwards from customer experience to make customer lives easier every day. We try to design customer experience 5 years out, 10 years out, sometimes just a year out, but we work really far, far, far away there in the future and work backwards. What do we need to do a year from now, 2 years from now, and what do we do now, today, tomorrow, and next week, next quarter? And it starts with customers. So these are kind of our main stakeholders, but there's a lot more when it comes to environment. So we're looking at all the NGOs, we're looking at our sellers. Sellers are a big part of what we do. They obviously put their products on our shelf to fulfill, so sellers are a big part of that. Obviously, all of our suppliers that kind of feed our operations with solutions, software, and hardware, and services. It's the communities we operate in. Super, super critical for us. Obviously, the climate pledge signatories. We have 550 other companies that signed climate pledge with us to hit the net zero carbon by 2040. So all of those are kind of our peer companies as well. Looking at NGOs, governments, kind of public policy, but I'm super proud, and I actually treat our associates and all of our Amazonians and 1.6 million people that we employ as being our customers as well. They really do care about the environment. And so there's a lot of examples that we actually do when it comes to environmental kind of leadership in that space and making sure our customers are seeing that. We're part of a lot of coalitions, obviously. Zamba is one of them, Zero Emission Maritime Buyer Alliance. We're part of SABA, which is Sustainable Aviation. We have Clean Energy Buyer Alliance, which kind of we helped to co-found quite a few of those and kind of put a lot of effort, investments, and through partnership with others, like I'm sure everybody in this room, we're just trying to kind of influence those hard-to-abate sectors. So through Zamba,
we've... Buyers Alliance. I just want to call attention to that again, because the power of the Buyers Alliance. Tell us a little bit about that power.
It's a lot of companies. For Zamba, for example, it's the Aspen Institute, it's Patagonia, it's Chibo, it's 40 other companies that we're kind of working on decarbonizing long-haul transportation. So hard-to-abate, maritime, ocean transportation. How do we kind of get the net zero shipments there? And we've had our first net zero shipment, obviously, with a partnership with Maersk a couple of years ago. It was a year ago or so, where we had a full lane from Asia. I believe it was to Port of Rotterdam in Europe. That was kind of completely net zero, which was great to see that. And we just kind of want to scale that through those partnerships. So that's just one of the examples. But customers are seeing that. If you go to our website, we have about 1.4 million products today on Amazon.com that are certified as climate pledge friendly products. So there's a value for that. Obviously, we're working with about 50 different certification types to make sure that those products are meeting the bar. They have to meet the organic content of the product, the workers' well-being. There has to be a carbon, there has to be a waste work stream that we're kind of assessing. It's a very high bar, but once you meet that bar, customers love those products, and so do sellers. And we can see that the products that we actually certified as climate pledge friendly products that we sell on Amazon.com, they have a 12% lift in sale within the first year from certification.
Take that note and use it.
It's great. It's 12% lift in sale within the first year. So we see that from customers. Sellers obviously love that too. It just kind of fuels their business. And sellers are part of our customers as well. We wouldn't exist if not for sellers, right? So that's part of, that's another example of climate pledge friendly products. I mean, our packaging is something customers directly see, and that's where it's kind of one of the most visible things around packaging, and they see value in us reducing packaging, reducing the amount of corrugate we use, reducing the amount of plastics we use, and obviously investing in where we don't need to pack at all. 12% of all shipments that we do today do not require any additional overpacking. So it's we've kind of eliminated that. We call it shipped in on containers.
How much?
So
what percentage?
12%. 12% of everything we ship. And then in the last 5 years, for everything that actually has to be overboxed or overbagged, we're able to reduce corrugate by 41%. So the amount of corrugate by 41%. So we just have a lot of science teams that are throwing items damaging items on purpose to make sure we can they meet the mechanical properties of transportation.
That's a job.
And they get there to the customer. It's a lovely job. When you go to the lab, it's fantastic.
My teenager, I think he would really appreciate that job.
So that's great. And then we also the plastic pillows. I think, I don't know, if you have pets, they hate the plastic pillows when you they used to be in your package that were protecting your items from bouncing. We eliminated all of those, like they're gone. Pets are loving that. We have actually social campaigns with social media campaigns with our customers. They're kind of showing how happy their pets are receiving the package with paper damage or protected by paper. So it's just been we're seeing that feedback. So
and you talked about driving growth in sales, and I imagine that there's a meaningful reduction in costs, savings associated with reduction of packaging use. Obviously, you're taking this long-term time horizon in planning for your impact mitigation as a result of, I would imagine, to some degree, in addition to serving your customers, avoiding risks that you see coming down the pike, right? So, and brand reputational value, I would imagine, is another business value for what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's good for sellers. Like we pass a lot of savings to sellers. Any savings we have, we pass them to our customers, obviously, and we save a lot of money through Prime Day. We communicate those numbers, how much money we save through Prime Day and or holiday seasons, and in many cases, like in transportation, like in packaging, the costs and the environmental aspects are going hand in hand.
Yep.
The fewer miles you drive, the more packages you put on your truck. Like it's all better for the environment, and we measure mileage per package as well. So
great, and I know a lot of our community members are also seeing business advantage in attracting and retaining better employees. You mentioned that was an important stakeholder for you, so I'm sure you're measuring that. I was intrigued to hear your comments over lunch about your financial, what do you want to call, framework, decision-making framework that is looking at all kinds of aspects of financial value associated with your work and giving you the ability to trade off as things change, where you're spending your money and so on. So impressive operation that you have going. Talk a little bit more about the operationalization of these massive goals. Like, how do you approach your job every day? What are some big wins? What are some of the biggest hurdles that you face that you're having to find solutions to overcome?
Part of the operationalization is really starting with the end in mind and working backwards. That's another Amazon leadership principle, is kind of start far in the future. And it was ironically, I was here yesterday. I had 4 calls from my hotel room. Only one of them was about 2025, 2026. We talked about some programs we're going to do, but most of the calls that we spend time on and most of the reviews and decision making happens 2030, 2035, 2040. Work that far out and work back from there. And then we kind of operationalize everything that we need to do today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, and what's the latest we have to start to actually finish on time by 2040. So obviously our path was not going to be linear because we're taking those investments so far out into the future, but it's just part of the fun of our science team, of our innovators, of our engineers to kind of work that far out in the future and then kind of operationalize it back. When we operationalize it, we measure everything. We're a data-driven company. We measure every single thing we can measure, and then we all obviously hold ourselves accountable to a very high standard when it comes to hitting those deadlines. So an example is when we committed in 2019, when we launched our climate pledge, we said we're going to buy 100,000 vehicles. We'll have 100,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2030. And we work backwards from there and operationalize that, and who are going to be our partners, who are going to be our other companies we have to bring along on the journey. My apologies for that. Who's going to be everybody that we'll have to bring on? Like, how are we going to power those cars? How are we going to put the charging stations? How are we going to service those? The battery replacement program. So, all of that we plan backwards, and then we kind of work on it. And I'm just proud to say we have 30,000 vehicles today on the road. 20,000 of them are just in the U.S. And 10,000 outside of the country. We've also made a commitment to have additional 10,000 vehicles in India, which is exciting. And then we can see customers loving it. That's kind of part of that plan. And we feel really comfortable now knowing that plan. Rivian was our partner initially with designing that vehicle and making sure that vehicle is actually meeting all of our standards, not just environmental, but loading, unloading, safety, everything driver related. So it's a really cool experience driving one, and I can tell you more about that. But so that's kind of one example. Renewable energy obviously has been a big one. There's a lot of conversations about nuclear, and it's been great. It's the same. We took a long-term view a few years ago. We said, how are we going to power all of our operations? And we have today over 600 renewable energy projects, wind and solar. We're obviously looking at nuclear energy as well, and investing in that space as well. But we work backwards on how do we, 600 projects don't happen overnight. If you worked with permits and with just developers. Like it takes time, there's process delays, but at the end of the day, like that's part of our culture, working far away, working far in the future and working backwards. We're enabling a lot of those solutions to suppliers as well. We've launched Amazon Sustainability Exchange last year, which is a new website. We continue to expand this with our carbon credit service now, but also a lot of the resources on everything we do we share externally. What used to be proprietary information is now on Amazon Exchange, Amazon Sustainability Exchange. If you just find that website, you can pretty much find everything. Building carbon in your concrete, in your steel, how do you scale your mass timber? How do you work with grocery products? How do you work with fuels? How do you work with energy? Like all of those playbooks are there, including some of our scientific models. And lastly, we're trying to scale it not only to suppliers and partners, but also to our climate pledge signatories. So when we launched the pledge, when Jeff Bezos back in 2019 kind of announced we're going to have a pledge for 2040 to hit net zero carbon, like we had companies starting joining us, and they said we want to decarbonize together with you. And today we have 550 companies that joined us. So from 45 different industries, 60 different countries, they all join us. And together with those companies, we do a lot of joint action projects. Like we're trying to influence the spaces and areas where we, outside of coalitions, where we kind of can make a really meaningful change. So I'm excited and optimistic about it. So. Sorry, I took a long-winded answer.
No, I love the energy. It makes me encouraged and hopeful for sure. Just really quickly, there's a lot of, first of all, I really appreciate your orientation towards the not letting perfection be the enemy of the good, and respecting and honoring everybody's journey. One of the things that a lot of our stakeholders are struggling with right now is communications, how to communicate what it is you're doing in a way that continues to add value and doesn't create distraction. Can you say a little bit more about how Amazon thinks about that and what you're hearing from customers?
I mean, we have formal mechanisms to obviously seek feedback from customers. We run sustainability perception studies all over the world, where kind of how are we perceived in different segments of our business, and those are kind of more formal. I love the stories about just our vans being on the roads in the cities and just customers giving us direct feedback to our drivers, and our drivers being customer too, kind of giving us that feedback directly, how much they love driving the vehicle and how meaningful it is with kids coming in, they want to check the vehicle inside, like it's super cool to drive one. I took a couple of trips to deliver packages to customers in the city where I live, and it's just a phenomenal journey. Like you get into this car, so much tech all over you, around you. Like there's just a wheel and 2 pedals, that's all that's in the car. Like 20 cameras, but there's just this big screen that tells you everything. What you have, what package, what's the next drop off, traffic conditions, everything around you. The doors are closing and unlocking and locking automatically after the driver exits and enters. Like it's super cool, like the ergonomics throughout, where your next package is behind you. Like it's actually really, really well optimized. It's a great experience, but also hearing from customers when you see them and you deliver packages, like they appreciate that. Customers appreciate plastics, obviously. I mentioned when we eliminated plastic, the little fillers inside of the box, like we got tons of videos from TikTok, and there started to be this campaign on plastics, like customers being happy of their dogs not popping them, and then we had another group of customers that started making Christmas decorations out of the paper that goes into the box. So like there's a whole competition going on TikTok. I had no idea, but like it's so creative to use this actually filler paper to do your Christmas decorations. I didn't know that. So we hear it from AWS customers, which is our data center business. Like they really want to know our energy footprint and our carbon footprint of how they store the data. They want to know how we use power use intensity and how good we are comparing to other peers in the industry, and how efficiently we're storing and running their data. So that's another one. We hear back from customers that actually use our refurbished products. So we give second life for circularity to our Kindles and our devices and Alexas and all that. So it's been we see a uplift in sales in those products as well. So it's just great to see that those programs are working and we're communicating to customers. So.
Win, 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 and I think
it's a lot of wins.
That's what we all need to focus on, is how we can both build business value and also live within the planetary boundaries that are very real, that all of us need to be sensitive to. One more quick question, because I know our time is up, but how are you dealing with changes in the environment, in the context we're in? Anything different?
I think like everybody else, like we operate globally, right? We're a global company, operating in so many countries. So like we're going to continue to hit our pledge in 2040. That's our commitment. We made this commitment, and our business got far more complicated internally with all the different new business ventures we've launched, and then externally as well. But at the same time, like we're committed, and we're going to go after that. And I just mentioned, like we're working so far in the future that if I look at the decisions we took in the last 6 years, this is what we see today, because those are the decisions we took 6 years ago. And as I mentioned, I was on so many calls that we're taking decisions so far out. I could probably tell you where we're going to end up in 2025 and 2026 when it comes to our footprint, because those decisions have already been taken. There's a little bit of room we can have, but at the end of the day, it works so far out that yes, if it gets tougher, it gets tougher. But we also have financial models where it makes sense to invest. Like our North Star hasn't changed; it's still 2040, and if we use marginal abatement curves for everything, which is kind of then the metric to use to predict your cost parity on a lot of things we're doing. And if you look at one thing's getting more expensive because, I don't know, the incentives goes out, or whatever it is that we accounted for in our marginal abatement curve, there's a next thing that's becoming financially viable. So we're just going to shift those priorities, and we're going to look at that every quarter and see how we influence that. And obviously our biggest challenge is, I would say, part of that is just the environment, but the other is also the hard to abate sectors and how to kind of go around those, like meat production and dairy products and long-haul transportation, air, like construction materials. We do a lot of work there. We're investing a lot with a climate pledge fund, which is kind of the money we're seeding into startup companies, and a lot of partnerships with companies that have really cool technologies. And we're investing in those to kind of help them to accelerate their efforts and scale to our scale, which is enormous, and so to overcome a lot of those challenges, internal and external also. I don't know if that answers directly your question.
I think absolutely, and I first of all, I will say again to you, thank you so much for the work that you do and for Amazon's continued commitment and efforts. I want to reinforce to the group that most of our multinational brands are responding similarly by saying that their long-term trajectory and focus is not changing, and so that gives me hope and encouragement. And thank you very much for being a partner.
Thank you for having me.
It's a joy.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, KoAnn. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Robert.
Oops.
We will see you.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
Do you have any questions?
You don't get any questions. Sorry, you get no questions. No gosh darn questions.
Grab Robert on the.
But we will have plenty of time for questions in this next discussion period. So we truly will. I would like our other guests to please come on up on the stage. Let's see, I'm going to take this chair over here, I believe, and have you folks gather there. And we have another treat, I think, coming up in our discussions now. We're going to dive a little bit further into this area of the impact that we all have as a community on retail and consumer brands that drives changes globally. And we've got some practitioners in that arena that each of you have a kind of an area of specialty there that I think is we want to call attention to. I learned this process, the power that retailers have, and you know this story better than anyone, because I'll tell that backstory in a minute. But are we good on all of that? Some 40 years ago or so, I was engaged in the battle between the environmentalists and the beverage industries, the retail industries, and all their unions and so on, fighting for a California bottle bill, a deposit system in California. It was a dream of mine since I was in 5th grade. I said, we need to have a bottle bill. We need to have a deposit law in California, and I'm going to make that happen. And of course, it was command and control at that time. You battled the evil industry. And we battled the evil industry, and we demonized them, and we raised a lot of money because we demonized our enemies, and then they demonized us back and spent even more money and beat the heck out of us, and we lost. And that wasn't the outcome that I wanted. I wanted to actually win, I thought. And so we turned that around by essentially me deciding that I would listen to our adversaries and have conversations. And I met up with Bill Coors, the head of Coors Brewing Company at the time, who turned out to be a secret supporter of ours, and yet he couldn't come out publicly because, with his good ideas for how to improve this law, because the retailers would have pulled his product from the stores. And so he realized that he was kind of stuck. He had to work with me secretly. I had to work with him secretly to orchestrate the changes that would bring that about. And I said, okay, well, so retailers really are calling the shots here. Maybe we should talk to retailers. So then I talked to some retailers, and the head of one of the retail chains was a far-right evangelical Republican conservative, so we knew that there was no reason to talk to him. So I spoke with him first, and he turned out to be our hero, a champion of ethical behavior. Who knew it? An evangelical wanted, ethical behavior, and he thought that we were ethical. And he worked with us, orchestrated things. Bottom line is, we managed to turn our opponents into allies systematically, every one of them, until we had virtually everybody aboard with the environmentalists, at which point some of the environmentalists turned on me and said, well, now we can't support this because the wrong people are supporting, so it must be a plot. So that took about 5 years of therapy and dealing with trauma afterwards to realize, I thought you wanted to win. I thought we were going to win. In any case, we won. We've recycled a hell of a lot of stuff since that time. And I have learned over time the power that retail and consumer brands and others have. So I'm going to ask KoAnn to continue your story of where sustainable brands came from, because I think that was an insight that you had as well.
Very, very, very similarly. I don't need to go into my first half of my career background. I was in business-to-business media for 20 years, covering the natural resources markets, the first part of that, paper, timber, mining, and then in emerging technology, traveling globally, really exposed to the impact of globalization on our world, became really aware of the impact of business on our planet and the fact of planetary boundaries, and really felt moved by the concern I had about the narrative at the time, which was that governments and NGOs were going to save us and that business was inherently the enemy of our future. And I very much believed that actually business as an institution is best equipped to innovate. It has clear goals, and that the market drivers in this century were going to be such that those companies that learned how to innovate for environmental and social benefit were going to be the ones that would lead in the future. And so that was the thesis. I really wanted to focus on branded companies because we're all conscious that brands sit at the center of the economic ecosystem and have influence over business model and product and service design. They have influence over materials selections and choices, on business operations, on supply chain norms and behaviors, and probably most powerfully on our societal ambition, like how we define what good looks like. While we could have a lot of debate on that, but the fact is that marketing in the last century has excelled at creating demand from our society and consumers. So that's been the journey, since 2004, 2002, really.
And you really have developed quite a network of folks. And I want you to just mention when the next Sustainable Brands Conference is in a plug, because I would recommend it to everyone to understand and begin to meet the retailers and the consumer brands that are doing this work. So when is that?
Well, the next one is next month in New Zealand. We actually are now have a multinational footprint. We just have finished convening 4,500 people in Japan a couple of weeks back. Our U.S. flagship event is in October in San Diego, the 13th and 14th. So yes, we would love to have any and all of you there. But again, I would just say that the fact that we are present and convening on 6 continents now is not because we went out and tried to localize our brand. It's because of the interest and groundswell in what we're doing that came to us and asked us for permission to localize the work. And I think that gives me also a lot of hope.
Now, a lot of people are very concerned, given our political situation, our unique, kind of interesting political dynamic right now. And a lot of companies are saying, we're going to stay the course, and that's great to hear. But it's not always easy for these brands to do that.
That's right.
And in fact, the louder they are sometimes, the more harder they're pummeled by somebody who wants to kind of turn them around. So what do we need to do?
Yeah, I would say not even the louder they are, but the more the more committed they are to purpose and mission, and to speaking about their commitment and their purpose. Yes, in many cases, damned if you do, damned if you don't. You know, I think I've said earlier that, or maybe I didn't in this setting, but my personal belief is that if you're not communicating about what you're doing to all of your stakeholders in the right way, you're leaving value on the table. And at the end of the day, this is about creating business value, helping business and society thrive in harmony with nature. I can attribute that little blurb to my friend Simon over here, who helped us distill our mission and purpose into that little one sentence. It is hard to say. I mean, I think that I hope that this is a moment of learning for all of us. I think I come from a Nebraskan-based evangelical Republican Christian family and household, and I got into this work because I believe that we all sink or swim together, and that there's an urgency for us to learn how to communicate, understand empathetically each other, and communicate to each other in a way that is not othering someone. And I think we have unfortunately done that in an attempt to try and protect, you know, categories of people who maybe have been othered at one point. We have turned around and othered others, and that is non-functional.
Yeah,
so what I hear in my community is really a new commitment to reassessing messaging and languaging. And in some cases, people are even creating messaging tracks for different stakeholders, not to try and obfuscate their reality, but to try and land a message in a way that's going to be heard.
It's to enhance the same message, basically, by saying it in a language that people can actually understand, because we know that words are defined differently in red world versus blue world, and in very provocative ways. So you can't communicate honestly if you just use a term from blue world that has a completely different meaning in red world. You don't even know what that is. Suddenly you realize you've fallen into a trap. So the companies, I think the companies that have excelled are the ones that have stayed true to the mission, but are willing to adapt the language and the communication so that people understand that they are sticking with their mission and that the mission is worthy. It's not something that they just adopt.
And I think I respect and honor the fact that there is a lot of fear out there in corporate America about retribution and the potential implications to them continuing to stand up, and we're seeing that in real terms. And so it's not a counsel that any of us can give lightly. But I just hope that those of us who want to see a thriving planet and a society that works for all will continue to voice support for that ambition and have empathy and patience with the way people speak, and give people the benefit of the doubt before kicking them in the...
Yes, exactly. And speaking of which, and Simon Mainwaring, we've been friends for a number of years, and we got together in a co-conspiracy. I won't express what that conspiracy is, because it's still kind of happening. But it was actually an effort to, somebody was planning a campaign that might have been seen negatively by a brand, that we felt, this is a great campaign, it's a beautifully done communications campaign, but it would provoke more opposition than alignment. And so how do we now, and so we've been involved in a process, kind of behind the scenes, still behind the scenes, to transform, to make some transformative changes. But you are the master at understanding the power of brands, and that brands transcend the companies that technically own them. Tell us a little bit about your experience with brands as a movement, and how we can leverage that movement for positive change.
Thank you, Bill. Is that one that works there? Oh, thank you, Bill. And firstly, do go to Sustainable Brands conferences. I've been going for 16 years. It is a family. It is so additive to your professional and personal life, so could not stress that enough. And I'm so thrilled to be with Bill on the stage as a co-conspirator. And just speaking directly to movement building, I spent 18 years as an ad guy around the world writing campaigns for for-profit brands. And having worked on brands like Nike and Motorola, you discover you can lead these larger cultural movements. You can get people to shift their thinking and behavior if you use language the right way. And my great hope was you could use that in service of companies that want to do good. Now, that requires three things to be done well. And the first is you've got to shift your mindset from marketing to movement making. And movement is a helpful and unhelpful word, because as a noun, it sounds like a word that people throw around all the time very easily. Let's build a movement. But as a verb, it's very active and transformative. And by that I mean that, as Bill mentioned at the top, if only half of us are involved in change, the status quo is bound to perpetuate. We got in this mess together, and we've got to get out of it together. In which case, how do we get the greatest number of stakeholders working together to create the greatest collective benefit? And movement making is all about speed and scale. To do that more quickly, because we're trying to solve for these issues that we're all facing in our future. And so three things you've got to do well. Shift from marketing to movement making, and that means your suppliers, your employees, your customers, retailers, consumers, all of them are positioned as force multipliers for the impact and business growth that you want to create. And to that end, your mindset needs to be not what are we doing in a self-directed way, look at what we're doing at Amazon or Nike or God knows who, but rather, how can we position our brand as a platform through which you activate your own agency for change? As an employee, as a supplier, as a retailer, and your content celebrates that participation. To that end, the second thing you've got to do is really position your brand as the celebrant rather than celebrity of your stakeholder community. Mm-hmm. Your job is to be a catalyst, a springboard, a platform on which your portfolio companies stand if you're an enterprise, your brand, your employees stand if you're a brand, your consumers stand, if you're a distributor of products. You've really got to embrace that mindset that your marketing becomes this celebration of participation. And then thirdly, you've got to make sure that you close that last mile of the storytelling gap. Mm-hmm. With good reason, a lot of folks out there, they put real effort and resources and time into making a difference, and they've given so much to it. By the time they've actually got something done, they collapse on the ground, have a glass of wine, sleep, wake up and cry, have another glass of wine and go, oh my God. Instead of capturing the story of that impact and not just sharing it with consumers, which most do, but circling back and share it with your employees, share it with your retailers through the lens of their participation. Why? Because it's hard enough to stand up a movement in the first place, but it's damn hard to sustain it if you don't circle back and reward people's participation through that lens of celebrating them. When you do these three things well, a movement takes on a life of its own as a verb rather than a noun, mm-hmm. and you'll be able to accelerate and scale your impact and business growth as a result.
And you lose a little control of the messaging in the process, don't you? But at the same time, you've got an organic, real message.
You can lose control if you don't establish the sort of boundaries in the first place, because obviously a supplier's message may look very different to a consumer message or the ways they participate. But from a brand strategy point of view, you've got to be very clear, to your point about the language, what lane you're playing in, how you're differentiated to other competitors, what you're focused on, and what you're asking people to do to that end. So you kind of create the sort of bookends for where they can play, but within those bookends, you can show up differently.
Now I want to move to Andy Weinstein. And Andy, you are a third-generation Pepsi bottler, and most folks who inherit a bottlership, they say, my gosh, I'm a lucky guy. And, for life, you've got a bottling facility. And you certainly recognize you're a lucky guy, but you've taken it in a different kind of direction as well. You've helped to leverage that brand ownership that your family had and use it to build some operations that are environmentally and sustainability focused. Tell us a bit about that experience that you've had.
Yeah, so my name is Andy Weinstein. I am a third-generation Pepsi bottler that accidentally became a waste-to-energy entrepreneur. And basically what I realized a few years ago was every one of our trucks goes out full, comes back empty, which meant that I can use that backhaul as a collection system. So I can then collect things like plastics and be able to recycle that. Unfortunately, the technology that I first was kind of given from the oil and gas industry was not actually very viable at scale. And so then that made me pivot to kind of go to organic feedstocks and focusing on things like apples. So in Wenatchee, Washington, where my Pepsi franchise is located, it's called the apple capital of the world. we have so many apples. It's sometimes hard to kind of wrap your head around the volume. But I went to my neighbor and I said, hey, how much waste do you guys have? I would love to start processing it and see if I can get value. And they were like, yeah, we have 55 tons a day. And you just kind of gobsmack at the sheer volume. And you're like, oh, did I find a unicorn or did I find a problem? And unfortunately, I started to kind of investigate my entire supply chain and value chain. I found out, I found a huge problem, because everywhere around the world you find these. And in fact, just within my own network of kind of my senior advisors and board, our network has about 1,500 sites in the United States that produce 50 tons of biogenic feedstocks. And so that was a kind of a huge eye-opener of saying, okay, this is a copy and paste model that the scale of input is never going to end and the scale of output is never going to run away. Because what we're doing is we're converting it first into a coal-like product that basically gives us a large amount of water as one piece and then a solid fuel as the other. Mm-hmm. And that solid fuel, when you light it on fire and turn it into power, we can capture all the emissions as food-grade CO2. So what we're doing is
capturing the emissions as food-grade CO2 from that process.
Yeah. So we can then sell that to your local Pepsi bottler or Coke distributor or whoever.
If you know anyone there.
Yeah. I might know a few names.
If you got a name,
I also created the Next Generation Bottler Network at PepsiCo and the Next Gen at the American Beverage Association, because I realized in many of these spaces there's a huge void of leadership, and if you're at the table, might as well be at the table.
Yep.
But yeah, so with kind of going back to generating power and then capturing all the emissions, what that means for the big hyperscalers is they can build these data centers and have their backup power be emissionless, effectively. And so they also are like, oh, I don't have water. I'm like, well, that's an inherent byproduct of my process. So I have the water, I have the backup power that's emissionless, and then I also have the carbon credits that go with it, because everything that we're putting into the system is an avoidance of landfill.
Can we pause and just give a clap for that? Yeah, deserved.
Thank you. Ready for the next step?
Yes, keep it up.
So the next step is we're going to gasify that solid fuel. And when you gasify it, you produce two things: hydrogen, food-grade CO2, and then a carbon ash. For the hydrogen, if you look at heavy vehicles, the market for moving things like beverages is not going to be electric, just because you're replacing sellable product with battery. But hydrogen is a much lighter system, and truthfully, hydrogen is just another battery. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our fleet to be hydrogen-based, so that we all of a sudden reduce our emissions of our Pepsi fleet by 90%. And this is where I have super unfair advantages, because I have two hats. We're going to then carbonate our beverages with our locally produced CO2, which also lowers the greenhouse gas emissions, because we're no longer having trucks coming from Mississippi delivering CO2. Right? Like, yeah. When you start to see the actual supply chain maps of all of your supplies and commodities, I bet you Amazon can tell you about it. It's one of the scariest things in the world, because you just start to realize, okay, we're sending too much bad stuff in the wrong direction before it even gets here. Mm-hmm. So what we can do is create a distributed network of basically fuel and fizz for the beverage industry off of these waste streams that are present everywhere, and they just have they just don't really have a home right now, because people haven't right-sized the waste solutions to the demand, and that's really what we're focused on.
That's amazing. So that's
High
another
five.
round of applause for that. Now, a lot of people would say, just to bring up, negative, a lot of people would say, well, you're just creating another fuel. You're just creating this, another evil fossil fuel that we're just going to be burning. It's not real recycling. What do you say to that?
Fine. No, like seriously, like at the end of the day, we don't have enough fuel. We don't have enough power. Mm-hmm. Like, we need to modernize. Mm-hmm. And so if we keep on demonizing all these other aspects, we're not going to get anywhere. Mm-hmm. Right? And this is one of the things, as somebody who's been part of the American Beverage Association for about 20 years now, you start to realize people not like malintent. Like, there's no like evil person in the corner circulating. No, They're just like, oh, I'm looking at my business model. It tells me to go from here to here.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And the consequences are not on my balance sheet, so I don't see them and I don't
Right.
know them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
And I can't do anything about them, so I'm going to do what I can in my area. And then this creative guy over here is going to take what I was creating as 55 tons of waste a day, 55 tons?
55 tons.
55 tons of waste a day, and he's going to convert it into the product that he needs for his business. Like,
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and that's metric tons, so that's not even like
those
the
are-
fake tonnage.
Those are real tons.
Yeah, it's a real ton, not fake imperial tons.
Yeah. I'm going to turn to Mark, and then I want to have time for some questions, and then we have a little celebration to do toward the end of this. But Mark, you've become one of the masters, I think, at using brands and understanding brand influence to drive change in the California legislature and elsewhere. Tell us a bit about how you've done that, and tell us a bit about what's happening right now with SB 54 and the massive changes in plastic and packaging that are being promulgated as a result of legislation there in California that you guys have been behind for a decade or so.
Sure. Well, thank you, Bill. And just to, full disclosure, 38 years ago, Bill hired me while he was on his listening tour to be the bad cop. He hired me as an intern.
You need a bad
local
cop.
organizer.
You need a bad cop.
And so the bill that kind of sits down and listens to industry benefited from having this guy in borrowing Bill's car go around and pursue local deposit ordinances in cities and counties throughout California to create leverage. And that was my first job that Bill hired me to do. And it was in that process of leveraging the brands to support more expansive recycling policies, we kind of learned that we could actually move policies much more easily at the local level than we could in the state legislature, but that the most important thing to the brand owners was uniform statewide policies. So they hated the local ordinances. So, we balanced each other out in terms of those early days. I also want to note, in terms of the story that Bill alluded to, is that, how many people have heard of Anheuser-Busch? How many people have heard of Rayleigh's supermarket chain in Northern California? Good, I'm impressed that there's that many people who have heard of Rayleigh's.
Okay.
That was the dynamic in that meeting, where Chuck Collings from Rayleigh's, Bill had been listening and determined that the obstacle to a beverage container recycling law in California among the retailers was they didn't want to take the containers back inside the store. And so Bill figured out that if we could create a recycling infrastructure outside the store, that would take the retailers off the table. And it was Chuck Collings who said in an industry meeting with Anheuser-Busch there, August Busch from Anheuser-Busch, as Chuck Collings tells the story, who said, we're going to fight the Enviros, we're going to fight them on their bottle bill, their next bottle bill endeavor. And Chuck Collings says, I don't want to get between my customers and a political issue. So that was an important lesson. Retailers serve everyone. They don't want to be perceived as ideological. And August Busch told Chuck Collings, well, you can't sell out the rest of the industry, and was apparently very animated in the meeting. And Chuck Collings said, well, if you feel that strongly about it, maybe you shouldn't have us sell your product. And it was that message of this small Northern California retailer had leverage over what at the time was the biggest beer producer in the world. So a couple of lessons in terms of just the dynamics of change. And those are lessons that I learned very early at Bill's heels and have carried forward. So now in California, we pursue producer responsibility policies in the world of plastics and in other material types. But I've learned that there's your inside voice and there's your outside voice. And the inside voice is that passionate environmentalism that keeps you motivated and showing up to work every day for 38 years. But your outside voice is the voice that you use when you need to kind of bring everyone together. And you need both. You definitely need both. And you need lots of different people, just like Bill needed a bad cop in those early days to do the local organizing and the local ordinances. So there are all kinds of roles that we have to play and different personalities. But at the end of the day, you do have to have a voice that is sitting down and talking about the win-win opportunity. And our success at Californians Against Waste, begun by Bill, and I continue that tradition, is being willing to compromise, to being willing to listen to what the brand owners or the retailers or the manufacturers want and try to put that together. So as a result of those efforts, we have the most expansive bottle and can recycling law in the country. We ban plastic bags. We ban plastic bags at the grocery store, not by beating the crap out of the retailers, but by partnering with the retailers who were tired of doing battle over plastic bags. And by showing them a path to move to reusable bags, they became partners in that legislation, and even to the point where they actually got sucked into joining us in a ballot measure to defend the policy against the plastic bag manufacturers. So, definitely kind of unique partnerships. So when your outside voice is one of progress and cooperation, there's so much more that you can end up accomplishing.
Yeah, can I add some color to that?
Sure.
Because I think we always use sustainability as if there's like an added cost to your system. But what it ended up really, like for us, and when we talk about bottle bill, it meant that we had a reduction of our cost of goods. So in the beverage industry, because when you think of all of the aluminum that's ever been smelted in the world, it's 75% is still in circulation today. So we are really good at keeping aluminum in circulation. And for us, when we started doing recycling across the country, across the world, the net result was cheaper cans. At the end of the day, sustainability is about addressing risk on a much longer horizon, and we're able to look at that longer horizon and be able to plan things out versus trying to do such short-termism, which is actually the most expensive thing, right? And I think the efforts that we've seen on the EPR side, in Washington State, we're right now dealing with EPR and a DRS. EPR is extended producer's responsibility. DRS is deposit return scheme. The reality is one is a system of who is responsible for paying into the system, and then the other one is a system of collecting. So fundamentally, we want to have the ecosystem be able to collect the product and have it come back into circulations. And so they're kind of two parts of the same coin.
And I don't think there's a beverage company, particularly in Oregon, that would trade the deposit return system that they have in Oregon for the EPR system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because in Oregon, all the bottlers own the recycling system. So they are kind of bypass a lot of the haulers. And so the reason right now in the United States, the industry that is focused most heavily against recycling is the long haulers and the trash haulers. So the waste managements, these are the companies that are fighting, at least in Washington State and throughout the Northwest, these are very consistently the ones. And I think it's really interesting to see how if we start to collect things closer to the source of generation, their business model actually just completely goes under. So they're putting themselves in a financial situation that will weaken them because now it's incentivizing the beverage industry to start to get into the collection.
No, I think that's something that we would do well to focus on is acknowledging the business model obsolescence that we're creating and honor and support a redesign of business models for those businesses. I don't know how practical that is, but
They have to be willing to come
They
to the
have
table.
to be willing.
I actually
Well,
think
yeah.
they are figuring it out. I mean,
And I
when
think
you look
so,
at
too.
Republic
Yeah.
Services is really starting to invest in the secondary process of materials, and Waste Management has tried many times to invest in that. They're just they
you mean
haven't quite-
WM?
WM, yeah.
WM.
And
just-
I think, yeah,
But they throw pennies at dollar problems.
understand, but
one little build in terms of the voice that we're all taking, using to try and drive collaboration. Who here has felt a pullback through your stakeholders in the last few months, given the political headwinds, just in terms of driving change, scaling change? Has anyone felt pullback, concern in the last few months? Two things are absolutely critical. One is you've got to meet the moment, and I think the dialogue has to be driven around business value creation and de-risking a business and building resilience for the future, rather than leaning too heavily into that inside voice, which might be more activist in nature.
Yeah.
And then the second piece
100%.
is you've got to take people with you. I think those in the sustainability movement, and I blame KoAnn singularly for this, we know we've often got too far out over our skis with like wonkish language and acronyms and so on. Yet these issues are common to everyone. So if we can simplify the language and reach back and take people with us, for example, instead of protecting biodiversity, let's protect animals, plants, and where they live. Mm-hmm. It sounds simple, but it's what wins the day over politics.
Language is really important.
Yeah.
I think we definitely have gone way too wonkish, and there are terms of art that have meaning within the inside voice.
Yeah.
But when we talk outwardly, we need to be as simple as possible. How do I turn this apple into hydrogen?
I love
Everything
that
else.
inside voice and outside voice. I love it. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a great
simple
lesson.
Yeah.
And there's more lessons in proactivism, I think, that come from that. So we've had a great conversation about that. I'm going to take one more step here this afternoon, and I just want to recognize an accomplishment or a set of accomplishments now in this area of circularity. Now, we're going to talk about the circular economy this afternoon, and we're going to talk about new avenues in recycling. I've been an advocate of recycling for decades. It's been challenging to push recycling beyond certain thresholds. Plastic recycling now been stuck at about 8% recycling for a number of years, but a few types of plastic recycling are at very high levels, thanks to Mark and thanks to other folks like that. But we are learning from nature that there are many approaches to recycling that we have begun to use in the economy that we are beginning to expand upon. And I think companies like Waste Management, who have tried numerous times to develop this into profit models, are going to find that there are new opportunities that will give them those business models for the future. But there is one individual here who I know, it might be this one here, it might be this one right here, but who has carried forward more recycling legislation and utilized the skills of proactivism better than anyone that I know of. And on the occasion of us surpassing 500 billion products recycled in California, bottles and cans and electronics and computers and tires and quarts of oil and all kinds of things that have been encompassed in the systems. I want to recognize Mark Murray. And we have this nice little reward, this nice little award that we are going to present to Mark for his accomplishments. And I'm just going to ask him to stand because I want to get a picture with Mark. This guy here, 38 years of leading the charge in California, which, by the way, is a pretty big, powerful state. It's not as big as powerful as Texas. Well, it is actually bigger and more powerful than Texas still. So work on that. Work on that. But Mark, more than anybody else, has assured that we have passed 500 billion products recycled under that system and made plastic recycling a reality from that. So thank you, Mark, for everything that you've done over the past generation or two for that. And we are at the end of this session. We still didn't really get to Q&A from the folks here, but we have a great session on circular economy, so I think I will retire this session here, and we're going to move to a circular economy discussion now. And John Schmeya is going to join us for that. So thank you, panel.
Thank you so much, Bill.
And please buttonhole them. Give them a round of applause once again. All right, absolutely.